Welcome back to Crazy Karen HOA. She said appeal denied, and I said show me the record. Karen shoved an insurance letter at me and screamed that I could not read it without permission. You are going to respect the notice, she said, her voice cracking with that fake authority edge people use when they know they are on thin ice. I stood there holding my coffee cup like I had run outside too fast, which I had, because she had been banging on my door at 7 in the morning. The wind rattled the loose paper packets in her hand, and I could see the key ring with too many keys jangling on her belt loop. She was Evelyn Parker, compliance officer for Harbor Point HOA Incorporated, and she had just handed me a violation notice for something I did not do. I am a solar installation scheduler. I deal with approvals and inspections all day, so I know how to read a process and spot when someone is cutting corners. This notice was dated 3 days ago, but I had never seen it before. The alleged violation was parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway overnight, which would have been news to me because I drive a sedan and the only thing in my driveway was a bicycle. I looked at Evelyn and said, I do not own a commercial vehicle. She smiled, the kind of smile that makes your stomach drop, and said, This conversation is not a debate. It is a directive. You have 72 hours to comply, or the fine doubles. I asked what I was supposed to comply with if I did not have the vehicle in question. She pulled out a laminated policy sheet and waved it at me like it was a legal summons. The policy prohibits commercial vehicles, she said. You were seen. I asked who saw me and when. She said the report was confidential and I would need to file a formal appeal through the portal. I said fine, I will do that right now. She said the portal was under maintenance and would be back online Monday. It was Friday. I said so I have 72 hours but no way to appeal for 3 days. She said that is correct, smiled again, and walked back to her car. I watched her load a rolling file cart into her trunk, the kind people use for enforcement paperwork, and drive away. I went inside and opened my laptop. The HOA portal was not under maintenance, it loaded fine. I uploaded a response with photos showing my empty driveway, my sedan registration, and a statement that I had never owned a commercial vehicle. I saved the confirmation screenshot. Then I called the management company, a firm out of Grand Rapids that handles about 20 HOA accounts in the area. The woman who answered said she would forward my concern to the board. I asked if I could speak to someone now. She said the board meets monthly and my issue would be added to the next agenda. I said the fine doubles in 72 hours. She said I should have thought about that before I violated the rules. I hung up and stared at the notice. Something about it felt wrong. The formatting was clean, the language was official, but the date stamp was off. I pulled up my email and searched for prior HOA correspondence. The last notice I had received was a reminder about trash cans 6 months ago, sent by the management company, not by Evelyn directly. This new notice had come from her personal email with a board CC that I did not recognize. I clicked on the CC address and it bounced. Fake email. I screenshotted that too. Then I remembered something. About a year ago, a neighbor 2 streets over, a guy named Marcus, had complained at a community meeting about a towing incident that did not make sense. He said he had been fined for a violation he never committed, appealed it, and then his car got towed anyway. The board had dismissed it as a misunderstanding, and Marcus eventually paid the fees to get his car back. At the time, I had thought it was bad luck. Now I was wondering if it was a pattern. I called Marcus. He picked up on the 3rd ring and I explained what had just happened. He went quiet for a second, then said, "She did the same thing to me." I asked him to walk me through it. He said he had received a notice for an expired registration sticker even though his registration was current. He appealed, uploaded proof, and then 2 days later, his car was gone. The tow company said the HOA had authorized it. He went to the impound lot, paid $300, and the board told him it was his responsibility to keep his paperwork updated. He said he let it go because he was dealing with a recent loss and could not take another layer of chaos. I told him I understood. I said I was going to look into it, and I would keep him posted. I spent the weekend digging. I filed a records request through the portal asking for all violation notices issued in the past 2 years, the votes authorizing those violations, and the contact information for the tow company the HOA used. The portal accepted the request and gave me a ticket number. Monday morning, I got an email from Evelyn saying my request was incomplete and I needed to resubmit using a different form. She attached a PDF that was password protected. I emailed back asking for the password. She replied saying the password had been sent separately. It never arrived. I drove to the management company office. It was a small suite in a strip mall near the highway. The receptionist was polite but firm. She said records requests had to go through the portal. I showed her my ticket number and explained the runaround. She said she would check with her supervisor. 10 minutes later, a man in a polo shirt came out and introduced himself as the account manager for Harbor Point. I asked him about the records request. He said it was being processed. I asked when. He said within 30 days per state law. I said the fine I was contesting would double before then. He said that was between me and the board. I left and sat in my car. I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk, but this time I was the one who needed to talk, and nobody was listening. I pulled out my phone and called a local mediator I knew from work, a guy named Ron who helped resolve disputes between contractors and property owners. I explained the situation. He listened, then said, "You need to document everything, every email, every notice, every conversation. If she is running a selective enforcement scheme, the only way to prove it is with a paper trail that shows the pattern." I asked Ron what he thought was happening. He said it sounded like Evelyn was either incompetent or intentionally targeting people who would not fight back. He said if she was using fake emails, backdating notices, and coordinating with a tow company, that was fraud. He said I should file a complaint with the state attorney general and consider small claims court for any fees I incurred. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered and a man said, "This is Dan with Premier Towing. We have an order to impound a vehicle at your address tomorrow morning at 6. I said there must be a mistake. He said the order came from Harbor Point HOA and listed my address and a sedan matching my plates. I said I do not have any outstanding violations. He said he was just following the order. I asked who at the HOA authorized it. He said Evelyn Parker. I asked if he had documentation. He said he did. I asked if I could see it. He said I could come to the yard after the tow. I said I would be outside at 6 to document everything. He paused, then said, "Suit yourself," and hung up. I did not sleep. At 5:30, I was outside with my phone charged and ready. At 5:55, a flatbed truck rolled up. Dan, the tow operator, got out and looked at me. I said, "My car is not being towed." He said, "I have an order." I said, "Show me." He pulled out a clipboard with a work order. It had my address, my plate number, and a note that said unauthorized commercial vehicle. I said, "That is my personal sedan." He looked at the car, looked at the order and said, "This does not match." I said, "Correct." He said, "I am not towing it." I said, "Thank you." He got back in his truck and drove away. I called Evelyn. She picked up on the first ring, and I said, "Your tow company just left without my car because the order was fraudulent." She said, "You are in violation." I said, "No, I am not, and I have proof." She said, "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive." I said, "You already said that." She hung up. 2 hours later, I got another notice. This one was for failure to maintain landscaping. My yard was fine. I had mowed 3 days ago and the flower beds were clean. I took photos and uploaded them to the portal with a note that said, "This is the second false violation in 4 days. Please provide evidence or withdraw the notice." An hour later, the notice was deleted from my portal account and replaced with a new one claiming I had an unapproved exterior modification. The modification was listed as a doorbell camera. I had installed it 2 months ago after getting board approval in writing. I found the approval email and forwarded it to Evelyn with a CC to the full board list I had scraped from old meeting minutes. Within 10 minutes, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and Evelyn was standing there with her rolling file cart. She said, "You do not have permission to contact the board directly." I said, "I have permission to respond to false charges." She said, "Your approval was rescinded." I said, "Show me the rescission." She said it was voted on last month. I said, "Show me the minutes." She said the minutes were not public until approved at the next meeting. I said, "That is not how this works." She said, "I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry." I stepped back and closed the door. I called Ron again. He said, "She just threatened you with escalating fines as retaliation. That is illegal. Record everything." I said I already was. He said, "Good. File a harassment complaint with the management company in the state. Do it today." I filed both complaints within an hour. The management company sent an auto reply saying my concern had been received. The state sent a case number and said an investigator would follow up within 60 days. I did not have 60 days. I had a tow threat, fake violations stacking up, and a compliance officer who was clearly willing to fabricate anything to get her way. I started calling other neighbors. I went through the HOA directory and reached out to anyone I recognized. Most people did not answer. A few said they had heard rumors but did not want to get involved. One woman, Linda, said she had been fined last year for a trash can violation that never happened. She paid it because it was easier than fighting. Another guy, Tom, said his brother-in-law had been hit with a fake parking violation and ended up selling his house to get away from the HOA. The pattern was clear. Evelyn was targeting people who were either new, going through a hard time, or unlikely to organize a defense. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and satisfying payback. I went back to the Marcus case. I asked him if he still had any of the paperwork from his towing incident. He said he did. I drove to his place, and he handed me a folder. Inside was the original violation notice, his appeal with proof, the tow receipt, and a letter from the board saying the matter was closed. I looked at the dates. The appeal was submitted on a Tuesday. The tow happened on Thursday. The board letter was dated the following Monday but referenced a vote that allegedly happened the Friday before the tow. I pulled out my phone and looked up the HOA bylaws. Board votes require a quorum and must be recorded in minutes. I asked Marcus if he had ever seen minutes from that meeting. He said no. I asked if I could make copies. He said take the whole folder. I drove home and spread everything out on my kitchen table. I had Marcus's timeline, my own violation notices and portal screenshots, and a growing suspicion that Evelyn was not just bending the rules, but inventing them. I needed to prove that the votes she was citing never actually happened. That meant I needed meeting minutes and quorum logs. I filed another records request, this time specifically asking for minutes and attendance logs for every board meeting in the past 18 months. The portal accepted it. 2 days later, Evelyn emailed me saying the request was overly broad and I needed to narrow it. I replied asking which meetings I should request. She said I should already know. I said I did not. She said that was not her problem. Ron told me to go to the county clerk. HOA minutes are not always filed, but sometimes management companies submit them for liability reasons. I drove to the county building and asked the clerk if they had any records for Harbor Point OA. She searched and said they had quarterly filings going back 3 years. I asked to see them. She printed a stack of documents, and I sat in the lobby going through them page by page. Most of it was routine, budgets, insurance updates, vendor contracts. Then I found something. A filing from 14 months ago included a note that the HOA's general liability insurance was under review due to a complaint. The complaint was not detailed, but it referenced selective enforcement and procedural violations. The insurance company had required the HOA to adopt a formal appeals process and submit proof of compliance within 90 days. I flipped to the next quarter's filing. No follow-up. No proof. The insurance company had never signed off. I made copies of everything and drove back home. I called the insurance company listed in the filing. After 2 transfers, I reached a claims analyst who confirmed that Harbor Point's policy was still under review and that any new complaints could trigger a cancellation. I asked what would happen if the HOA lost coverage. She said they would not be able to enforce violations or collect fines until they secured a new policy, and most carriers would not insure an HOA with an active fraud investigation. I thanked her and hung up. I had my trump card. The insurance issue tied directly to Evelyn's enforcement pattern. If I could show that she was fabricating violations and bypassing the appeals process, the insurance company would cancel the policy and the HOA would be forced to suspend all enforcement. That would stop the fines, stop the towing, and force the board to deal with her. But I did not want to play it yet. I needed to let Evelyn dig herself deeper. Ron had told me that the best evidence is the kind people create themselves when they think they are winning. A week later, I got a 3rd violation notice. This one was for noise. The complaint said I had been running power tools after 10 p.m. I worked days and I was asleep by 10. I checked my doorbell camera footage. At the time listed in the complaint, my house was dark and quiet. I uploaded the footage to the portal with a timestamp. The next day, the violation was amended. Now it said I had been playing loud music. The new time was 2 hours earlier. I checked the footage again. At that time, I was on a work call in my home office with my door closed. No music. I uploaded that footage too. Evelyn called me. She said, "You are being uncooperative." I said, "I am being accurate." She said, "The board is considering a lien." I said, "For what?" She said, "Unpaid fines." I said, "I have not been assessed any fines because every violation has been disputed with evidence." She said, "Your disputes are frivolous." I said, "My disputes are documented." She said, "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive." I said, "You already used that line twice." She hung up. I called Ron and told him about the lien threat. He said, "That is extortion. If she files a lien without a valid fine, you can sue for slander of title and she could face criminal charges. Document the threat and send a cease and desist." I drafted a letter citing the relevant statutes and emailed it to Evelyn with a CC to the management company and the full board list. Within an hour, the management company called me and asked me to stop emailing the board. I said I would stop when the false violations stopped. The account manager said he would schedule a call with the board president. I said fine. The call happened 2 days later. The board president, a retired accountant named Gerald, started by saying he wanted to resolve this amicably. I said I did too. He said Evelyn had informed him that I was refusing to comply with violations. I said that was false, and I had evidence proving every violation was fabricated. He said he had not seen any evidence. I said I had uploaded it to the portal multiple times. He said the portal did not show anything. I said that was because Evelyn kept deleting my submissions. He went quiet. I said, I have screenshots of every upload with timestamps. I also have evidence that Evelyn is using fake board email addresses, backdating notices, and coordinating with a tow company to impound vehicles without valid violations. Gerald said, that is a serious accusation. I said, I have proof. He said, send it to me directly. I said, I will, but I am also filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General, and I am prepared to go to small claims court if this does not stop. He said he would look into it and get back to me. I said I needed an answer by end of week. He agreed. 3 days later, I got an email from Gerald saying the board had voted to suspend all pending violations against me pending a full review. He said Evelyn would no longer be handling my account and all future correspondence would go through the management company. He also said the board was conducting an internal audit of recent enforcement actions. I replied thanking him and asking for a timeline on the audit. He said 30 days. I forwarded the email to Marcus, Linda, and Tom. I told them the board was finally looking into Evelyn and that they should file their own complaints if they wanted their cases reviewed. Marcus said he would. Linda said she did not want to deal with it. Tom said his brother-in-law had already moved and would not come back for a hearing. I understood. Not everyone has the time or energy to fight. But I did. And I was not done yet. I went back to the records I had pulled from the county clerk. I cross-referenced the board meeting dates in the filings with the dates Evelyn had cited in her violation notices. Out of 12 violations I could track, 8 referenced board votes that never appeared in any filed minutes. 2 referenced votes that happened on dates when no meetings were scheduled according to the HOA calendar. The remaining 2 referenced votes that did happen, but the minutes showed the votes were about landscaping contracts, not individual violations. Evelyn had been inventing votes. I compiled everything into a single PDF, the fake violation notices, the portal screenshots showing my evidence submissions, the deleted records, the backdated tow order, the insurance filing showing the unresolved complaint, and the timeline showing that at least 8 enforcement actions were based on VOT, as that never happened. I emailed it to Gerald, the management company, and Ron. I also sent a copy to the State Attorney General with a cover letter summarizing the fraud. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the management company. The account manager said the board had completed its audit and found significant procedural irregularities. He said Evelyn had been removed from her role as compliance officer and the board was revising its enforcement policies. He said all fines issued in the past 18 months were being reviewed and any that could not be substantiated would be voided. He also said the board was offering to reimburse me for any costs I had incurred, including legal fees, if I agreed to drop my complaint with the state. I said no. I wanted the complaint to proceed. He said the board was concerned about the insurance implications. I said they should be. He asked what it would take for me to withdraw the complaint. I said, a written order from management that Evelyn must route all communication through official channels, her own selective enforcement documented in the minutes, and the HOA canceling the vendor-rue relationship tied to the abuse. He said he would take that to the board. 3 days later, Gerald called me. He said the board had voted to accept my terms. Evelyn would no longer have direct enforcement authority. All violations would go through the management company. The tow contract with Premier Towing was being terminated, and the board was adopting a formal appeals policy with a neutral third-party review process. He also said the board was requiring Evelyn to attend mediation training and submit all future enforcement recommendations in writing with supporting evidence. He said the board had documented her selective enforcement pattern in the meeting minutes, and she had been formally reprimanded. I asked about the insurance. He said the board had disclosed the complaint to the carrier and was working on a corrective action plan. He said if I withdrew my state complaint, the insurance company would likely sign off. I said I would think about it. I called Ron. He said, "You have everything you wanted. The board admitted wrongdoing, Evelyn is neutered, and you have a formal policy protecting future homeowners. If you push the state case, it might take a year, and you might not get more than you already have." I said I wanted her gone. He said, "She is effectively gone. She has no power, and the board is watching her. Take the win." I thought about it for a day, then I agreed. I sent a letter to the state attorney general saying the matter had been resolved and I was withdrawing the complaint. The state closed the case. But I was not finished. I wanted everyone to know what had happened. I compiled the entire timeline into a presentation: the fake violations, the fabricated votes, the insurance complaint, the corrective action, and the new appeals policy. I emailed it to every homeowner in the HOA using the directory I had scraped. The subject line was, "What your board did not tell you about enforcement abuse." The next day, my phone did not stop ringing. Neighbors wanted to know if their old violations were part of the scam. People who had paid fines wanted refunds. A group of homeowners started a recall petition to remove the entire board and elect new leadership. The local news picked up the story and ran a segment about HOA fraud in West Michigan. Evelyn stopped showing up to board meetings. A month later, the board held a special election. Gerald and 2 other board members resigned. 3 new members were elected on a platform of transparency and accountability. The new board hired a different management company and terminated the contract with the firm that had enabled Evelyn. The new management company implemented an online portal with full audit logs so no one could delete evidence again. And me? I got a check for $1,200 covering my legal consult fees, the records request costs, and the time I spent fighting. It was not about the money, it was about making sure no one else had to go through what Marcus and I went through. I ran into Evelyn once more, about 6 months later. I was at the grocery store and she was in the checkout line ahead of me. She saw me and turned away. I did not say anything. I did not need to. She knew. A few weeks after that, I got a packet in the mail. It was from the new board. Inside was a thank you letter and a copy of the revised enforcement policy. The letter said my case had prompted a full review of the HOA's procedures and that several other homeowners had come forward with similar complaints. The board had identified a pattern of abuse going back almost 3 years. Evelyn had been targeting people who were new to the neighborhood, people going through personal hardships, and people who did not have the time or resources to fight back. She had been using her role to generate fines, coordinate with vendors who kicked back a percentage, and intimidate anyone who questioned her. The new board had referred the matter to the local prosecutor. I do not know if charges were ever filed, but I do know Evelyn moved out of the neighborhood shortly after that. The new board also settled with Marcus. He got his tow fees refunded and an apology. Linda decided not to pursue her case, but the board voided her fine anyway. Tom's brother-in-law never came back, but the board sent him a refund check and a letter acknowledging the wrongdoing. As for me, I stayed in the neighborhood. The new board was night and day compared to the old one. They published meeting agendas in advance, they responded to emails within 48 hours, and they actually followed their own rules. It was what an HOA was supposed to be, a way to maintain the neighborhood without turning it into a police state. I still have the evidence binder. I keep it on a shelf in my office as a reminder that documentation wins. Every email, every screenshot, every receipt. It all mattered. And I still talk to Ron. He helped me turn that case into a template for other people dealing with HOA abuse. We published a guide online with step-by-step instructions for fighting bad enforcement, how to file records requests, how to document violations, how to spot procedural fraud, and how to escalate when the board will not listen. It has been downloaded a few thousand times. I get emails from people all over the country saying it helped them win their cases. The funny thing is, Evelyn's own words came back to destroy her. During the investigation, the board reviewed recordings from past meetings. In one of them, she said, "I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry." The board included that quote in the minutes documenting her selective enforcement. When the insurance company saw it, they flagged it as evidence of harassment and required the board to terminate her authority as a condition of keeping coverage. Her smugness became the smoking gun. I also learned that the tow company, Premier Towing, lost its contract not just with Harbor Point, but with 2 other HOAs in the area after word got out about the fraudulent tow orders. Dan, the operator who refused to tow my car that morning, ended up testifying at a board, hearing about the pattern of bad orders he had been receiving. He said he had raised concerns with his boss months earlier, but was told to just follow the paperwork. After the scandal broke, the company fired the dispatcher who had been coordinating with Evelyn and implemented a new policy requiring photo verification before any HOA tow. The board also discovered that Evelyn had been using the rolling file cart as a prop to intimidate people. It was always full of blank forms and random paperwork, but she would pull it out during confrontations to make it look like she had a mountain of evidence. After the audit, the board found that most of the files in her cart were duplicates or irrelevant documents. It was all theater. The final piece came when the board reviewed the vendor contracts. Evelyn had been signing off on payments to Premier Towing without board approval. Over 18 months, the HOA had paid the company almost $15,000 for tows that were either disputed or outright fraudulent. The board demanded an accounting from the tow company and eventually settled for a partial refund. The management company that had been covering for her lost 3 other HOA accounts in the aftermath. Turns out, when you enable fraud, your reputation does not recover. In the end, I got exactly what I wanted. A written order from management that Evelyn must route all communication through official channels, her own selective enforcement documented in the minutes, the HOA canceling the vendor relationship tied to the abuse, and a policy change that protects everyone who comes after me. The insurance company never did cancel the policy, but they did require the board to implement quarterly compliance audits and maintain a public log of all enforcement actions. The HOA is now one of the most transparent in the state. Every violation, every appeal, every vote is documented and available online. No more backroom deals, no more selective enforcement, no more Karen with a file cart and a bad attitude. I still live here. My driveway is still empty except for my sedan and my bike. My doorbell camera is still recording just in case. And every time I see the entrance sign for Harbor Point HOA Incorporated, I remember the morning Evelyn shoved that insurance letter in my face and told me I could not read it without permission. She was wrong. I could read it, and I read everything else too. Until next time, keep your receipts.